I've been very lucky thus far in my life in that I've been in very few horrifying or scary situations. I'm pretty smart and I tend to avoid situations where trouble could potentially arise, though from time to time I try to provoke the universe into throwing something thrilling my way by going on some random adventure or seeking out abandoned places. And each time I end up coming out unharmed and disappointed. There's one time though that I did get trapped in a horrible situation, though it wasn't on purpose. This happened purely by accident, but it's the only time I can ever think back to where my life was legitimately in danger. I get chills all over my body every time I think about it. Luckily, I've pushed it back into the recesses of my memory, and only bring it up every once in a blue moon to tell a scary story, such as now. I used to live in a small town in southern Kentucky where I attended college. I had moved in with my boyfriend, which was also my very first relationship. Things had ended pretty sourly between us, and we were forced to live together for about a month while I waited for my parents to help me move back home. I was pretty bitter about the breakup, given our relationship had lasted almost 3 years, and I had been in a spiral in those last few months that I had lived there. I overindulged in alcohol and weed and kept myself pretty doped up for a good portion of that last month. I hated that I was leaving, as I had made several really good friends there, and I had adapted quite well to small town life. I was going to miss it when I moved back into the big city. I never got my full license after I got my driver's permit, so I didn't have a car of my own. My ex had a car, and so I was entirely dependent upon him for rides, which he stopped giving to me after we broke up, which I understand, to be honest, but I felt like it was the least he could do after all the shit he had put me through. I thankfully still had a bike, and had resorted to biking myself all over town whenever I needed to go somewhere. I love biking, and thankfully this experience did not ruin the activity for me. On the day the incident occurred, I was hiking to campus to register for the current semester. Since I was moving back home, I would be registering for online classes for the very first time. I still had to go in person and fill out way too much paperwork and attend a couple of boring meetings. On this particular day, it was scorching hot, with the heat index well over 100 degrees. I had a bottle of water with me, but it wasn't doing much good. The trip was longer than I usually biked, and I was completely soaked in sweat by the time I arrived on campus. As I was heading there, I saw a white van parked on a side street. There was lettering on the van, but I couldn't make out what it said. The driver was sitting in the driver's seat and looked up at me as I passed him. He was an older black man with a gray beard. I couldn't see much else about him, but as I passed him on my bike, I saw that he was staring right at me. I thought nothing of it at the time, other than it being a little creepy. I'm naturally paranoid, so I glanced back when I was a couple of blocks ahead to see if he was following me, and he wasn't. When I got to campus, I tried my best to dry myself off in the bathroom, but my hair and clothes were still wet. I sat in the back of the auditorium and tried my best to pay attention to the meeting, but my thoughts kept creeping back to my now ex-boyfriend and our now failed 3-year relationship. This wasn't the first time my heart had been broken, and I had actually been planning on doing this for several weeks. Everything about my life had fallen into chaos, and I was scared to be going back home and starting over from scratch. More than scared, though, I was pissed, mostly at myself. I felt like I had thrown away 3 years of my life, and I hated it. I hated myself for being so stupid, for not breaking up with him sooner, for not doing better in school, and for so many mistakes that I'll never be able to take back. I'm telling you this not because I want your sympathy, but just because I want you to understand my frame of mind during this incident. The meeting adjourned and I went down the hall to speak with an advisor. She was nice and spunky and talked about my interests and hobbies and selected a good bunch of classes that would be easy for me to do online and would still be useful for my degree. It was a relatively stress-free school registration, and the only thing I was dreading at that point was biking back home. My ex had to work and wouldn't be there, thankfully, but the long ride back home was going to be even worse this time, as it had gotten hotter. As I began to pedal back to my apartment, my thoughts went back to my ex again. I hated that I couldn't stop thinking about him and our whole shitty situation. I began pedaling faster, wanting to get home so I could smoke and watch something on Netflix and just forget about the whole thing. Disillusionment and detachment were second nature to me now, and they were the only ways I could cope with the situation. I passed this old train car museum near town square, which signaled to me that I was almost back home. The heat was sweltering at this point, and little streams of sweat were practically pouring down my face. It was getting difficult to pay attention to the road, as I was now constantly wiping sweat off my forehead. A bump in the sidewalk came up, and I noticed too late that it was a very large one. As my bike tried to wheel over the bump, the force quickly popped the tube in my tire, and in seconds the entire front wheel was completely flat. The jolt was so sudden that it almost threw me off my bike, and I managed to stop myself right before heading first into traffic. I started cursing at myself, and my head got hotter and hotter as I started swinging my backpack around in frustration. Some papers and other items flew out of my bag, and I chased after them. I stuffed everything back into my bag, crinkling up every single piece of paper in there, though I didn't care at this point. My fuming temper combined with the near blackout temperatures were causing me to sweat immensely. I could feel the heat rising in my head, so I gathered my bag and my bike and walked it across the street. Even though I was less than 8 blocks away from my apartment, it felt like miles in this heat. With everything else that happened up to that point, I felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke on me. As I walked my bike across another block, I saw the white van again from earlier, driving down the street I was now on. The same driver was still in the driver's seat, and as if he could sense me, he looked over at me and stared at me once more. I looked away this time and kept my focus in front of me, thinking about the icy cool apartment that was waiting for me. As I crossed the street and the van passed me, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the van was turning down the street I had just crossed. I kept walking and got up another block when I got a gut instinct telling me to turn around. I did and froze. The white van had circled back and was now slowly following me. If you knew anything about this area of town, you know that most of the streets are one-ways, and it takes an effort to circle back around if you turn down the wrong street. The driver would have to have been driving very fast in order to turn around like that, or at least knew the area well. Either way, as it got closer, I could finally make out the wording on the side of the van. It said it was a transportation service for a local senior living center. The tension in my back eased a little when I saw this, and the van pulled up next to me as the driver rolled his window down. He told me he noticed that my tire had went flat and asked me if I needed a ride home. Now, you're going to judge me very harshly for what I'm about to do, and to be honest, deservedly so. The first thing we learn as kids is to not trust strangers, and to never get into a stranger's vehicle. As a kid, I had never been in a situation where a stranger or adult had tried to kidnap me or take me hostage in any way, and I felt at the time that I was too old to be the target of any creep or pedophile. My anger was clouding my judgment, and it was so hot and I was so miserable that I just wanted to get home, and the prospect of not having to walk my bike the rest of the way home was enticing. So, against the advice of every single adult and parent I had ever met, I said yes to the driver's offer. He smiled, but not in the usual happy kind of way, but in almost the way someone smiles when they're about to eat a juicy steak dinner. He quickly hopped out of the van and helped me get my bike into the back compartment. It was a spacious van, and the inside was in good condition and smelled like it had been recently cleaned. We got my bike inside, and we both got into the front of the van. The driver took off and headed down the road to my apartment. I pointed the vent directly at me and got an arctic blast of cold air right in my face. I immediately forgot all about my hesitation and doubt, feeling as if I had made the right choice. I kept my right hand on the door handle though, just in case I needed to run. Now many of you probably think this is where the story takes its dark turn, and it does, but not in the way you might think. He didn't start driving down the road away from my apartment, or take a gun out or pistol whip me, or anything like that. He turned down the street I pointed to and drove into my apartment lot. He pulled into a parking space, and I noticed that it was the space directly in front of my second-story apartment. I hadn't told him what building was mine yet, and so the fact that he had randomly picked the right one was weird and freaked me out a little bit. I turned to the driver and saw that he was smiling at me like he was before, and it creeped me out even more. Despite this, or maybe because of this, I thanked him for the ride. I told him that I was having a really shitty week and that it was a treat to get help from a kind stranger. His smile quickly faded, and for some reason that deeply unnerved me. Then he spoke up. "Don't thank me too much." A cold chill swept over my entire body as soon as he said that. I asked him what he meant, and he paused for a moment, and I could see his eyes running all over my body as if he were inspecting me. I felt violated. I don't know why I didn't open the door at that moment, but I was so taken aback by his behavior, I guess I was just frozen. It was at this moment that I finally got a good look at him. He was wearing a dingy red shirt with the sleeves cut off, torn basketball shorts, and flip-flops. Not at all the attire I would expect a driver to be wearing. His face was worn with age, and I could tell that he was a rather skinny man. But he had this crazed look in his eyes, and I feared that he could be capable of anything. He finally spoke up again. "Well, aren't you going to invite me upstairs so I can get a better view?" He spoke with a seductive, but at the same time almost aggressive tone. At the same time he spoke, I heard a click, and I could feel the doors locking. Another, more powerful chill washed over me as every single hair on my body began to stand up. I tried to jiggle the handle that I was still holding onto and confirmed that the doors were locked. A primal fear had completely taken me over. I had no idea what he was going to do next. I looked around for someone, anyone who might have been outside, and luckily I saw somebody throwing away their trash. The dumpsters were on the other side of the lot, though, and I was afraid if I tried yelling or making a scene, the driver would pull out some weapon and try to, hurt me or sedate me. I looked back over at him and saw that he was smiling at me with that creepy, almost salivating grin. I looked deeper into his eyes, and instantly a horrible realization came over me. He's enjoying this, fucking with me, and he was relishing in it. I saw him turn around and begin to reach for something in his back seat. At that same time, I could feel my phone start vibrating. I had turned the ringer off during the meeting at school, but I could tell by the vibrations that it was a phone call. I pulled my phone out quickly and saw that it was an unknown number. Seeing an opportunity, I quickly answered it. I almost shouted out loud when I heard that it was an automated call, concerning a debt I owed or something. I spoke nervously into the phone. Hey Mom, what's up?" As I spoke, the driver looked back at me, dropping whatever it is he had been reaching for in the back seat. He looked furious, almost as if he were about to rip the phone right out of my hands. He didn't, though, and I knew that this was going to be my only chance to get out of this van. "I'm here, actually. I'm about to walk up. My bike got a flat tire, but someone gave me a lift home." "Yeah, Mom, I'll be up in a few seconds." I hung up and looked back over at him, laughing nervously. He was still staring at me, his face full of a heated rage. The air in the car was already pretty chilly, and with the shivers and goosebumps spreading all over my body, I felt like I was about to freeze to death. "Sorry, but I gotta get going," I said sheepishly. The driver didn't move an inch. He just kept staring at me. His eyes were piercing right through mine, and I suppressed a powerful urge to throw up. "Could you please unlock the car?" I said weakly, practically begging at this point. He looked at me for a few more seconds, his eyes running all over my body once more. He then smiled creepily at me once again. He was enjoying every second of this, and for a split moment, I felt like he had called my bluff about the phone call. I said a quick prayer to anybody who might be listening, and prepared myself mentally for the fight of my life. To my surprise, though, he lifted his hand to his control panel, and I heard the doors unlocked. He had kept his eyes on me, though, the whole time. "That's too bad. Maybe next time," he spoke up. "Yeah, maybe," I spat out as I opened the door with an insane amount of force. That suffocating heat came flooding back into the car, but I barely even registered it. I was practically euphoric now that I was out of that van, and I raced to the back of the van to get my bike out. When I turned around the passenger side, I gasped as I saw that the driver was already there. He had gotten there impossibly fast without making a noise. His entire demeanor was deeply unsettling, and I just wanted to get as far away from him as possible. He towered over me as he silently opened the van's back door and helped me load my bike out. I thanked him once again briefly before walking as fast as I could away from him. I walked to the building opposite mine as I was afraid of him potentially seeing which unit I lived in. When I got to the stairs and looked back, I saw that he was indeed still staring at me. I left my bike behind the stairs and then went walking around to the back of the building. I was determined to not let him see which apartment I went into. I turned the corner and walked to the backside of the building. There was a breezeway that intersected the entrances to the apartments that led out to the stairs and the parking lot. I stopped at the entrance to the breezeway, too scared to peek around the corner. I finally summed up the courage and poked my head out just enough to see the lot. I could see the van still parked in the same spot, but the driver was gone. Suddenly the van began moving. As it backed out of the spot, I could see the driver behind the wheel again. I was too far away to completely see his face, but I watched him intently as he slowly drove out of the parking lot. He didn't look over, and as far as I knew, he hadn't spotted me. As the van drove away, I made a disturbing observation that hadn't clicked with me before. The van didn't have any windows in the back or on the sides. I had never seen a shuttle van without windows before. The black wording on the side of the van was faded, and there weren't any logos or unique symbols at all, just the title of the Senior Living Center in a plain font. As I pored over this, I walked over to my bike and peeked out from the breezeway at the lot. Once I was sure that the van was gone, I walked my bike back across the lot to my building. I locked my bike under the stairs and then walked up to my floor. I took one more look out into the parking lot, making sure that it was safe before heading in. I locked the door quickly and put the chain on behind me. Then I walked over to the sofa and slammed my body down, overwhelmed both mentally and physically from the incident. As I sat on the sofa and thought about the van, another, more unnerving thought came to me. The back of the van. It had smelled like it had been recently cleaned. There was that fresh scent of cleaner in the air, and the dirt pans on the floor had been completely clear. The myriad of scenarios and what this could have meant flooded through my head. What's worse is that I hadn't seen what he had been reaching for in the back seat, right before my phone rang and possibly saved my life. There was something deeply wrong with that man, and chills began to spread all over my body again just from the thought of him. Now deeply paranoid, I walked over to my window and veered out of the blinds. There was no one outside now, and no cars were moving. It was eerily still though, and with the sun starting to slip behind the clouds, the whole scene looked just like something out of a horror movie. When my ex came home, I told him about what happened. He took it seriously at first, before laughing in my face and telling me that I wasn't going to last 5 minutes without him. He then went to his room and I cursed at him under my breath. I left town a few weeks after that incident, and I never saw the man or the van again. To this day, I still have no idea what he had been reaching for in his back seat, and what his intentions were with me. And it's the not knowing that scares me the most. The windowless van, the freshly cleaned interior, and the mysterious object in his car that I couldn't see. It all painted a very bad picture in my head, and whenever I start to go into the more extreme possibilities, the goosebumps steer me away from those trains of thought. I didn't want to think about what that man would have done to me if he had gotten his way. Part of me wants to believe he was just fucking with me the whole time. I still go out biking all the time to this day, even in the dead of summer. But now I'm much more cautious of my surroundings, and when I listen to music, I keep one ear free so I can still hear if something approaches me. My advice to anyone listening to this story: stay aware of your surroundings. But most importantly, please heed the warnings of your parents and never get into a vehicle with a random stranger, no matter how tempting it may be. Because you never know where they might take you, or what they might do to you. Thank you for tuning into this story, guys. If you enjoyed it, consider joining the pack and hitting that subscribe button. You also share and like the video if you want, but that's not required. This is the Lone Wolf, and once again, you guys take care of yourselves, and I'll be seeing you all again real soon.